Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called A Full Human Breakfast, written by Coyote Havoc. There are very few universal constants. With worlds occupied by wildly varying life forms, it might seem to an outsider that nothing amongst all species would ever be similar. But they do exist. One of those constants that span all species is known by many different names and practiced in many, many different ways. As the local star to each occupied planet rises, and the sapient species greet the new day, the first thing all of them want to do is eat. My own species, the Quithus, enjoy a plain gelatin made from seagrass with a light fruit topping at dawn. We call this meal the gigastrate, bright meal, and it has been a part of our culture for as far back as any can remember. The morning light casts its colorful hues through the gelatin and stimulating our senses, whilst the fruit topping chases away the cobwebs of sleep. Dixtos prefer a light meal in the morning consisting of fallen fruits and fresh vegetables, called heluta, or sun feast. Everything is eaten raw and preferably on open air, where the warmth of the stars can be felt in the skin. As a cold-blooded species, it makes sense. Recursion prefer a wide variety of baked goods, carefully prepared during long nights on their homeworld. Starfish-Gold, or Star Rise, is a family event where everyone partakes in all manner of breads and pastries while planning out the day. Often the meal takes place under a massive window to observe the star as it comes up. Urbandos take the opportunity to clean out their larders. Animals that don't age well are consumed whole as their stars just begin to appear over the horizon, and any that remain once the star crests the horizon are set free. It's their way of giving back to the planets that have sustained them and keeping the cycle of life turning. Then there are the humans. Long ago, many humans practiced eating smaller portions for what they called breakfast. A fruit known as avocado, mashed on toast and lightly seasoned, was considered a luxury. Eggs and cured meats with pancakes was considered a morning staple of farmers and truck drivers. Steak and eggs, fried potatoes with onions, even a leftover pizza was considered a good breakfast for some. But one of their nations had long ago sowed seeds of what a human breakfast would become. Bacon, fried crisp, sausages cooked until the casing split, eggs cooked however the human wanted them. This would have sufficed for a majority of races, but not the humans. Beans on toast, a leftover from their Americans during one of the world wars, grilled red fruits known as tomatoes, fried fungus, and lastly, toasted bread rounded out this monstrous meal. The sheer volume of calories would have been enough to question their sanity, all packed on a plate and given an innocent name, a full English. If only it had ended there. Once they knew they were not alone in the cosmos, they came together as a species. It was a period of violence, as is common, but the clashing of their culture brought forth a united people, stronger together than believed possible. It also led to the creation of the full human, a breakfast that even the most well-fed species would have dropped a fork and fled from. Beans and toast, the relic of their world war, survived to make it on their plates, but with the addition of boiled tree sap, either from maple or birch, were replaced with chorizo and longanisa and added to scrambled eggs with a side of bacon. Due to culture, religion, and dietary philosophy, the meats could be replaced with grilled vegetables and fruits depending on who was cooking or eating. But that didn't do anything to disarm our caution. Grilled tomatoes and fried mushrooms would find themselves in company with grilled onions and fried garlic chips. Even sliced radishes with butter on crostini found their way into the breakfast, but that wasn't the end of it. With all of that, the humans had to add one last touch. Something that would break even the most stalwart of species, introduced to us as ranchero. It was a vibrant red sauce they seemed to enjoy on everything. We would soon learn, like every human is subtly different, so are their names for hot sauce, and all of them are addicted to it. Eventually, their massive breakfasts were just accepted as part of their culture, topped off with several cups of coffee or tea, which they claimed they needed to wake up in the morning. As they grew more accustomed to us, we began to notice more about them and why they consumed so much at breakfast. For every calorie consumed, the humans seemed to leap forward in physical ability and intelligence. For every gram of caffeine and capsaicin, they moved faster, were more mentally acute, and able to envision ideas that we had never considered before, making them a reality before our eyes. After a few decades, some of us began to embrace their foods as well, not so much in size, but in variety. Avocado toast has become popular amongst the Textos due to its relative inexpense. Pain au chocolat and baklava are considered essential to the Recursion. Urban das have begun to embrace sausages over live prey. Even my species have become accustomed to human breakfast, where beans and toast has become increasingly popular. While a few species try to consume a full human breakfast, the result of such gluttony have varied. Those few brave enough to succeed have mentioned something far larger exists in the human diet, spoken about in whispers and unfathomable to most species. The humans openly admit they do exist, and do so with absolute pride, going as far as admitting that there are very few humans have ever been able to finish these titanic meals. Although I would never dare to partake, I think I would like to see them for myself one day. The Big Texan and the Tom and Jerry are assuming names for monumental stakes, if the rumors can be believed. End of story. Story number 2, Recursion, written by Atra55. Lord Admiral Kaiser was in a difficult position. He had not conquered any world in several years, and the Supreme Commander was growing impatient. But potential targets aren't that numerous in the vastness of the galaxy. This small single-system species was his last chance. Humans had been discovered a millennia ago, when they were only beginning to tame the power of steam. At the time, with their high development speed, they were predicted to become strong rivals, or precious vassals. To avoid antagonizing them, High Command decided to leave them alone until a crisis where the junta could come in and save the day. But the crisis never came. When they were faced with the inevitable consequence of their industrial development, it seemed that they solved the problem themselves, but in a way that considerably hindered their development. At least, that was what the junta had managed to deduce from indirect observation. After all, they still were a spacefaring civilization, and certainly advanced enough to detect any spy probe in their solar system. Like most other primitive civilizations, not much was known beyond their existence, and what could be deduced from astronomy done from light years away. With their civilization so thoroughly crippled that it hadn't developed the FTL engine 8 centuries after reaching space, humans weren't considered interesting by the regime and were mostly ignored. It was only out of desperation that Kaiser was attacking them today. It would be a victory without glory, but at least it was guaranteed. He asked the head of the science division for a report on what they had learned. What are the results of the first scan survey? Having crossed the outer debris field of the human system, direct observation was now possible. It also meant the humans could probably detect them, but it wasn't as if they could do much to stop a fleet of 20,000 warships. It appears that they are quite more spread out in the system than expected, judging by the communications exchange between most large bodies. But considering the low impact detected on the environment, it probably just research outposts. What about their military capabilities? We counted around 300 ships, but impossible to know if they're armed or even their size from this. And the linguistics team? I would like to be able to ask them to surrender by the time we reach their homeworld. It would spare us some ammunition. They're making decent progress, though I must warn you that they sent a message to us. Really? What was it? If we understood correctly, get out. Be careful, Lord Admiral. We can't be sure that the reason why they've never built an FTL drive is the lack of technological capabilities. Kaiser didn't appreciate being told what to do. Still, he would keep an eye on future reports. It was not as if he had much else to do anyway. After a reunion with his strategists to determine which continent to start their invasion on, now that they had a picture of the planet, he was called by the communication department. "We received a message from the quantum comms, sir. Your private encryption code." It was probably the Supreme Commander wishing him good luck or something like that. He still decided to hear it. He decrypted it alone in his office and was grateful for that decision when he heard the clearly synthetic voice declare, "Leave our system now or face the consequences." No, that wasn't possible. Someone was putting a prank on him. Yes, one of his opponents wanted him to lose his status and use this crude method to scare him. They knew it was his last chance. Thankfully, he wasn't that gullible. Still, he would not tell anyone about this. It would be bad for morale. Still a bit shaken, but trying not to show it, he asked for an updated report, even if things probably hadn't changed much. "Well, my lord, the number of ships has doubled." "What do you mean doubled? They built 300 ships in an hour." "Of course not. The ships existed before. But they were on the ground or docked at a space station, and so we couldn't distinguish them. Really, it was to be expected that they had reserves, though it is a bit more than I thought. The number is still climbing right now, but it will surely stop soon." Surely. How many ships could be hidden by primitives without quantum comms who definitely didn't break the junta's unbreakable encryption? A lot, as it turned out. An hour later, the number had tripled. Most of the officers reunited in the meeting room looked nervous. All of them, in fact, except one. The head of the science division was smiling as if nothing was wrong. "Is there something you know that we don't, Doctor? Perhaps where are all the ships coming from? Because if it keeps going like this, by the time we reach Earth, they'll outnumber us 3-1. "I simply remember what you seem to have forgotten. Such a small species can't have produced thousands of ships of similar size." "Well, that's clearly false, because they have nearly 2,000 ships out there, and still climbing. Did you pay attention to the end of my sentence? Yes, they may have many ships, but these are probably small, barely a fighter or a probe by our standards. We live in a developed civilization, so for us, it would be absurd to brave the vacuum of space in these kinds of metal coffins. But they are primitive and lack resources and industry. For them, it's probably a more sensible decision to build hundreds of tiny ships, and maybe a few dozen normal-sized ones." "Do you have proof of what you claim?" "Not yet, but in an hour or so we'll be close enough to observe them directly." It did not even take an hour in the end. "My lord, we have the data from the first observations." "Please tell me it's good, because they deployed 800 more ships, and the crew is becoming nervous." "The luminosity of the ship suggests the size of a few kilometers, but before you panic, there is an explanation. They are using a mode of propulsion known as a solar sail, a giant but very light reflective surface used to gain momentum from lasers." "Are you sure that's what they're using?" "Well, it's either that or the ships are 4 times larger than ours. So I would say 99% sure." "And about their increasing numbers? You told me that they would have stopped by now." "They underestimated the number of ships they stockpiled in 8 centuries, I'll admit it, but I assure you their growth won't remain linear for long." He wasn't wrong. Soon, the number of ships began increasing exponentially. By the time the fleet crossed Mars's orbit, Earth was protected by a fleet of 40,000 strong. "Stay calm. I know the number is impressive, but these ships are tiny. Think of it as a fleet of fighters. It'll be more accurate." Kaiser himself did not believe what he was saying, but if the troops lost hope, then the battle was over before it even started. "Then why can we see their ships with a camera and a decent lens?" "Because they use solar sails. Dr. Atl can explain." "Wait, where is he?" I think he's in his office." Kaiser decided to go get him himself. He found him at his desk, holding his head in his claws. "Doctor, is there something wrong?" "I just received the first high-resolution picture of a human ship. They don't use soda sails." "Ah, I suppose we should surrender then." A few hours ago, he would have considered this unthinkable, but the hours of tension and anxiety had done their work, and now only acceptance was left. "Yes, sir, that seems the wisest option." "Call them. We don't have a complete translation yet." "They won't need it." If you say so." The communications channel was open, and the face of a hairless primate appeared on the screen. "Have you finally decided to try a diplomatic approach?" The synthetic voice was all too familiar. "We surrender." The human made an expression that, despite their alien nature, was easily identifiable as surprise. "Really? Why?" "What do you mean, why? You have at least twice as many ships as us." "All your ships are in level 0 space? Why would you do that?" "What does that mean?" "Yes, we were able to catch how you say that, so we literally translated our expression. The universe we're in right now is level 0 space. Then if you go in a universe inside an elementary particle, it's level 1. If you go inside a particle in that universe, it's level 2 and so on." Kaiser and Artel stared at the human in disbelief. After a long silence, the Admiral simply asked, "What?" "You were able to build an FTL drive in a level 0 space, but not a microverse gate. I guess that makes some sense, since you need another way of expanding. But still, that sounds like a pretty convoluted route. The laws of physics are much more lenient in some other universes." The doctor intervened. "The laws of physics are different. Wouldn't you just turn into a soup of particles?" "That's what happens in the overwhelming majority of cases, yes. But that's what probes are for, and considering the number of quarks in a droplet of water, you always end up finding something interesting. And since the laws don't vary that much between a universe and the one directly under it, you can select them for their characteristics quite easily. Hell, we spent like 4 days in my home universe looking for the universe where time flows the fastest, and then I spent 4 years in it preparing for this battle. The ship I'm on is only 1 year old, though, because we had to build our fleet in a universe with the right resources. Creating a navy in 20 level 0 hours was quite challenging." End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.